Hello. Okay, this part of the video is unscripted. I just sort of want to give it a forward. I'm making this video because every video I've seen on YouTube about poorly planned comics makes me want to scream and break things. So this is sort of an essay coming out of as much frustration as it is loving and relating to a work, and that's probably going to come across in it. This will probably just be bad and in poor taste in new and unusual ways. Please forgive me. Another thing I want to say before really starting is this video is going to be disjointed and uncurated, especially in the editing, probably even more so than my Petscop video. Because I don't really think I'm capable of curating my thoughts on this work in a way that wouldn't just result in me deleting the whole essay. I think as something user Deep Sea Grouper said on related subreddit, is that those who relate to this work are going to be those who have the hardest time presenting their thoughts on it, and that's kind of what I'm dealing with here. So, if there are a lot of things that seem like they are outtakes that are seemingly left in the video, this is why. This is Poorly Planned Comics Essay section, Genius as Empathy Terminating Cliché. One phrase I've seen passed around among readership since discovering the comic around 2022, I think at least, is the framing of Jack as a genius, and though I think this is well-intentioned in most cases, it seems to misunderstand the cartoonists and frame something that they regarded as a painful burden as instead being their defining trait. Below, I will provide an excerpt from one of their other works, Sharper's, alternatively titled Mind Surgery, which is sprinkled into PPC at certain points. Iris. It must be quite a burden always being the smartest one in the room. You have no idea. It sounds like a joke to you, because whenever you need help, or advice, or someone to bounce ideas off, there I am. And if I make you feel dumb, you can ignore me. Who do you think I call when a problem is too big for me? There isn't anyone. I look up, and all I see is the icy blackness of space. Nobody is in charge. Nobody's wisdom is there between me and the abyss. And it's always like that. I can't turn it off. If I found someone who made me feel stupid, I would be ecstatic. I would feel like a child who was lost in the woods for as long as she could remember, finally seeing the lights of home. Mary as a character is a bit difficult to pin down, as mentions of her are so sparse, but she seems to fall into the tyrannical logician archetype we discussed earlier in this document, but with a more sympathetic bent, having the vague malice of Maz, but with the very human pain displayed by the far more candid Maggie. Iris. And it spoke in Mary's voice, and it said, Iris, you are the smartest of all my friends and siblings. You have nothing to fear. To what extent she is meant to be another analog for one of the cartoonists is not particularly important here, but instead what I wish to highlight by quoting the first passage is the concept of intelligence as something that imposes isolation. I place intelligence in quotes because, of course, there is no such thing as a general featureless intelligence, only intelligence relative to a topic or framework, and I emphasize this to try to assure any readers feeling the same pain and to try to pivot to a clearer understanding of it. I digress. The association of intelligence with isolation is also invoked by Susie, who frames it as what has plunged her into the isolation of spending her life in the metaphorical backseat. We were so smart we had ADD because of our unused skills, and scratching one side just made the other side itch more. So rather than learn to care and share and collaborate, we drew a line down the middle like in a bad sitcom. Furthermore, in the prior strip, both her and Jack associated with pain and suffering. It is presented as an evil they must endure for safety, not something they consider to be a positive trait. I feel like in order to be not in pain, I have to understand things less, because understanding itself is pain. Said the umbrella was the guide, and umbrella represents understanding. See? Understanding is the devil. But there's a problem with that. Right, that's what the Mormons were on about when they came to my door, basically. They said, relax, let it go, take it easy. It's all about being happy. Right, which is that whoever understands things the best has the most control over them, which is kind of fucked up given the understanding itself is painful, which I can't really explain why that is the case, and it seems like one of the major points about this whole thing that deserves serious scrutiny. Like, maybe if we understood why understanding was inherently painful, it wouldn't be. Well, that doesn't make sense exactly, though it sounds weirdly plausible. And in this, the tendency to preempt any discussion of them with a statement of their genius seems rather cruel, if unintentionally so. In the last strip, the phrasing, tell it in a way that people can understand, is used. And though through this we see a more painfully direct version of what was being stated in that Sharper's passage, restart paragraph. And in this, the tendency to preempt any discussion of them with a statement of their genius seems rather cruel, if unintentionally so. In the last strip, the phrasing, tell it in a way people can understand, is used. And through this, we see a more painfully direct version of what was being stated in that Sharper's passage, that the difficulty that the people in their life have with understanding them is isolatory, and that extending understanding to others could act as a balm of some sort. It is certainly yearned for, more than that, needed, and perhaps it is not understanding itself that is so painful, but understanding alone rather than with many others. I think that if someone wants a more succinct examination of this, they should read 3D Workers Island by Tony Domenico, spelled right, double check, which is a work that focuses on the idea of being trapped and isolated within one's own understanding of the world. Unsure if this reference will help. Revise. Link to our own analysis of that work. Would that be uncouth? This isolatory effect dovetails with the concept of genius. To call someone a genius is to set them aside from the rest of humanity, even if this is framed positively. There is some implicit assumption that the genius is not like the rest of us, and that trying to understand them would be futile. And I hope you can see how horribly cruel this is. This acts as a thought-terminating cliché. When someone is framed as such, people will simply not try to empathize. It also acts as a defensive mechanism, a shield through which someone may be able to hide from the pain that empathizing might bring. The genius in its isolatory framing is seen to be a rare thing, an anomaly, an outlier. If one discusses the cartoonist as a genius, then they get to assume that what happened to them too is uncommon, a strange and macabre curiosity. They do not then have to contemplate if what we have seen here is in fact a more common experience. They do not have to contemplate if there may be more people in Susie's shoes, or in Jack's, or in Maggie's. I can only imagine this as a comforting lie, but it is a monstrous one. If there is any good way to pay respect here, it is to allow ourselves to instead face that pain. If we know that approaching this with sincerity and empathy will leave us in tears, then we will cry and try not to turn away. Alright, beginning recording. This is a recording of the tyrannical logician archetype section of my PPC essay. Start. This is a bit more abstract, but I'm going to try to point out a specific archetype that the comic keeps invoking, and why Susie keeps bringing it up. Despite hardly being mentioned in the final comic, Blue Queen Maz is probably the best touchstone to start exploring the idea of this archetype. Here are some excerpts from the blue strip script document, where the red artist is speaking to Queen Maz. Artist. So, is the number of these clusters finite or infinite? Maz. Finite, but larger than any finite number which could be described precisely in a book. Larger than could be described? Do you mean larger than could be written out? Maybe. No. Larger than could be described with words. Hold on. The artist draws a math dictionary and leafs through it. Would you consider definition of the busy beaver function for a Turing machine with two states to be a precise description? What is a Turing machine? Definition of a Turing machine. Then yes, I'll be at a roundabout way of saying 6. Did you work that out in your head just now? There's no work involved, merely figuring. What would the number be if the machine had 4 states instead of 2? 107. And 5 states? 47,176,870. And 6 states. Tedious to recite. Artist. Hey, we did a bullshit dream recursion loop thing with the world of this evil eternal fairy queen. And I'm trying to prove to the restart paragraph. Artist. Hey, we did a bullshit dream recursion loop thing with the world of this evil eternal fairy queen. And I'm trying to prove to the king that her mind isn't infinite. It's being surprisingly difficult despite how patient she is. Whether or not something is infinite is unverifiable by finite process. Right, I'm remembering now that you're one of those pedantic smart characters who's only helpful if you ask the right question. Technically, you didn't ask a question. Despite being an evil eternal fairy queen, Maz is characterized as coldly logical, and the threat she poses seems to stem primarily from her intellect, dangerous against the rather airheaded kings. The section in which she recites busy beaver numbers to the artist should seem familiar to a segment of the actual comic. Come on, Magnus, seriously. I ate lunch with you like a day before yesterday. I know you're not a super genius, you are not the blue guy, and the world does not really work this way. If you're so smart, what's the atomic weight of boron? 10.811 grams per mole. Oh crap, he's for real! Rodney, he's got Wikipedia on a teleprompter. Calm down. Maz, of course, being in the meta framework of PPC, does not really know Busy Beaver number 6. It would not be solved for years until after that line had been written. Someone, along the way, is looking the answer up on Wikipedia. The horror of Maz acts as another angle on the frustration other characters have with the blue guy in the red strip, as it's emphasized in that second excerpt from Blue Strip Notes. Blue guy, as well as his less over-the-top green strip analog in Magnus, is utterly unflappable. He is impossible to shake from a state of analytical thinking. When he gets going, he completely dominates the dialogue, filling up entire panels. A trait that is extended to Maggie, though she is significantly more humanized as she gains consciousness, and thus ceases to simply be a parody. Maggie also extends the infinite/expanded mind concept from Maz. This similarly also gets a nod in her debut strip. Why does your hypothetical situation contain multiple palette strips of Victoria? It's not uncommon for alternate universes to have copies of the Zen family in some form. I wouldn't worry about it unless she starts talking in third person. Though we can infer that the artist was going to say Maz, as Blue Strip has had contact with her, this also being the strip in which Maggie is introduced makes the ambiguity seem intentional, especially with Maggie having a heavy visual similarity to Victoria, who the artist refers to here, and Maggie even inherits her lack of eyes and most of her hairstyle. Again, all of this should seem familiar. Susie essentially states outright what she is trying to represent here. He's ridiculously difficult to overwhelm. He has a word for everything, even things that are simultaneously impossible and incoherent and terrifying and boring and inappropriately sexual. And indeed, in the prior strip, Jack is depicted as speaking in blue, the same as all of the characters I have discussed above, and wears the same square glasses worn by the blue guy/Magnus, which makes it even clear that he is a parody of Jack, as written by Susie. And again, we get a tie back to the themes surrounding Maz. She's dangerous to the cast because she is impossible to overwhelm mentally or outsmart, just as the tendencies of Jack listed above by Susie frustrate her. Also note that Maz is described as holding the world of her strip within her mind, adding to the parallelism with Susie's experience, existing within someone else's psyche. The kingdom is ruled by Queen Maz, whose power and authority are so woven into the fabric of the world that disloyalty to her is considered a form of madness. As the memory of the Blue King's mind. It's like a piece of grit which is so small that there is no way to sense it, save to bite down upon it unintentionally. It's like occasionally biting down on a piece of grit, so small you can't locate it. To make clear my thesis here, Maz, in addition to a larger subset of the PPC cast, are representations of Jack and Maggie as perceived by Susie, or rather, a way for her to vent her frustrations with them. They form an archetype that might be described as tyrannical logician. Another character that exists in this category, though this is far more speculatory, is the bride. From the notes of the original work by Duchamp, the bride is a figure in a dotted and fictitious realm, giving instructions to those in a mensurable or measurable one. The parallel to the framework the cartoonists built around Julie and Jane's work should be clear. She is being invoked as a representation of a command voice, and in fact Susie at one point specifically invokes her as such. I don't take instructions, it has to be a request or a threat. What's wrong with instructions? Are you afraid it's the bride's instructions? However, the twist that Duchamp puts on this unmeasurable, fictitious realm of the bride is that everything in it appears to be mechanical, and thus invokes associations of strict causality and logic. Again, Maz is a good touchstone to compare this to. It parallels the contrast of her coldly logical demeanor with being an evil eternal fairy queen in a fantastical world. Of course, because Duchamp's notes are in French and translations are somewhat troublesome to come by, this illusion is incomprehensible to most readers. To cap off this association in To Whom Does God Pray, Susie writes bride in the same shade of blue used for the other characters we have discussed. And because no one wants to finish reading a document only to be left with an unsolved puzzle, here is the solution to Who Does God Pray for posterity. It is mostly spoiled by an unposted version of the strip found in MSPA Bureau. The last name Megiddo is what would be under the final redacted text block, and it anagrams to Me I God if one is willing to allow solutions with questionable grammar. Again, this ties back to Susie's understanding of herself based on the idea of being a God voice or command voice a la Jane's, while also reflecting the self-hatred that seems to cross up with her, as she implicitly derides herself as a sickness affecting her headmates. If I want readers to have any takeaway from this, it's there is some internal reason, structure, meaning to what many readers will regard as meaningless rambling, if one allows themselves to examine it in a more emotional, sympathetic register of thought and walk a mile in Susie's shoes. This is Poorly Planned Comics essay quilt section. In strip 2014 of Poorly Planned Comics, Susie shows us this quilt. It actually shows up several times earlier in several stages of completion. But here it is captioned, My mother made me this quilt, yellow borders. Of course, it isn't really a quilt, only a picture of one. Her mother didn't really make it for her. She makes no attempt to hide this, not even editing the previous images of it out, giving the sense she's trying to convince herself of this more than anything else. To me, this is one of the most heartbreaking parts of the comic. One aspect of being plural that we have never really seen is the sense that nothing in your life is meant for you. She meant to write never really seen discussed. Just cut this part out and restart the paragraph. One aspect of being plural that we have never really seen discussed is the sense that nothing in your life is meant for you. When no one knows you exist, every gesture of kindness, no matter how small, is directed past you, and for someone that external people actually know of, often a host. There's an intense need for something meant for you. The quilt is done in a style similar to Appalachian patchwork quilts, heavily using the barn star designs associated with that style. These quilts are known for being handed down through generations, patched over and over. In many cases, they are attributed heavy significance, representing these generations of people who have kept them alive. To be given one would be to connect into the world, to the people before you. The quilt panel is like seeing someone build themselves a cloth mother and then hug it tight. Is painful to think about, especially given more context from Y, which shows that the cartoonist's mother had effectively cut them out of her life. As illustrated even early in the comic by Susie's chaotic style of image collages, which are insistent in clashing with the rest of the comic's visuals, she is desperately trying to differentiate herself and her work from Jack's. This is spelled out explicitly in page 271. That would explain why they pretend I don't exist. They're not pretending, they're censoring you from their awareness. Imagine for a moment that an acquaintance of yours suddenly started behaving differently from normal. How much of a change would it take for you to recognize this as a separate person from the one you know? If you saw the change in behavior as an improvement, then you would likely just call it self-growth and congratulate them on it. But if the change was for the worse, such as an inexplicable tendency towards violence, then you might be more likely to see that person as separate. Do not ignore me, please? Do not ignore me or else? Neither, just don't do it. I don't take instructions. It has to be a request or a threat. Put yourself in Susie's shoes. How far would you go to deter others from censoring you from their awareness and seeing you as someone you're not? How far would you go to get external validation that yes, you exist, no matter how negatively that recognition is framed? And would you, given enough time, fall for your own hyper-violent facade and come to believe yourself a monster? It's an extremely self-destructive tactic, but if one can't see any alternatives, an extremely enticing one. At the time I write this, knowledge of plurality is fairly commonplace online, even if not outside of it. There are resources readily available to help members of systems understand their situation and differentiate themselves. There are dedicated spaces online that are easier to seek out for discussing this sort of thing. But this was not the case only less than a decade ago, and having to figure these things out with no outside help is nigh impossible. Trying to find a therapist that will take plurality seriously and treat members of a system with respect rather than as an ailment is still a terror-inducing shot in the dark. Added negative societal attitudes towards schizophrenia and similar conditions, it is not at all hard to see what would lead someone down this path. But even after destroying herself trying to prove her existence to others, there are still readers that come away from poorly planned comics asking if she was real, or downright insisting that she wasn't. Even in death, it seems there is no escape from this censoring. The sobering horror here is that there are innumerable people in Susie's shoes out there. Some get locked away in the recesses of the mind and are trapped there forever. Some break out of that, come to an understanding with their headmates, but still don't make it because the world seems to have no place for them. And in many cases, no one will ever know they existed at all. So I think about Susie often, even if I only knew her through her comic after she was gone. Remembering those who managed to let their voice ring out into the world, even if only barely, is the best rebellion I have against this cruel reality. When Susie first directly introduces herself in no uncertain terms, she points back to a far earlier point in the comic as an example of her influence and conflict with Jack, that is, the Blue Artist's death. This isn't a one-time connection either, as later when she is illustrated as human, she wears a beret, as does the artist. With this new context, we see that the conflict was a manifestation of two headmates authoring a work together without an understanding of the other's presence. Abruptly, the in-universe equivalent of the author finds their work full of things that clash with their own sensibilities, things that they feel they can't ascribe to themselves, and through this is forced to acknowledge the presence of another alongside them, resulting in the addition of the Blue Artist to the strip. However, the distressing nature of the realization colors the relation as adversarial. Susie's avatar seeks to keep Jax locked up so that she may do what she pleases, while Jax seeks her death and the complete eradication of her influence. And in time, he, temporarily, succeeds in taking away her control by re-establishing himself as narrator. Afterwards, the king takes up a campaign of stamping any evidence of her presence out of the strip, erasing her work from it entirely. Even the strips of the Red King and Advisor in jail, which are referenced often in the following material, are entirely wiped from our versions of the strip. Even the most subtle references to her are met with an immediate hostility and notably imprisonment. Here's one panel in one of the sections where the king is searching for astronauts. He says, eyeball for a head is bad enough, but tentacle arms is too much. No, in fact, have that thing arrested. And if you look at it for like half a fucking second, obviously has the bow on it to make it feminine. It's an eyeball, it's humanoid specifically, it has a blue iris. It's later sort of repeated in the design Susie uses for herself. And going a bit down, we'll talk about this more in a second, but I want to give an aside first. Part of the period of the comic I'm speaking of here has been cut out, and its existence can really only be inferred, mostly by comparing the sequence of images and status update to what is seen in the final comic. Daniel Johnson's head on Mrs. Frizzle's body, and strip title not found, discusses a period of the comic where, under the artist's control, the style becomes very impressionistic, and the king becomes lost in the image directory. In addition to his governmental reforms, which made little difference to an essentially undefined country, the artist took the strip in an edgy and experimental direction, eventually abandoning representation entirely. Meanwhile, the Red King was lost in the pictures directory. After the mini-golf panel and status update, the next few lines of characters listed are from older strips by the cartoonist called House of Stairs, an incredibly abstract series of image collage comics. So we can infer that this removed period of strip consisted of House of Stairs comics being recycled into PPC by the blue artist. This largely off-topic aside is here to clarify that I'm speaking about this removed section and not Roomies on Acid, which was a whole other thing from what I can tell. Though diegetically it seems like the recycled House of Stairs and Roomies on Acid are just considered the same thing. Quote, her writing style is extremely easy to spot if you're looking for it, mainly due to the fact that her stories make no goddamn sense. Jack Masters. Quote from the Red King, the artist isn't even making comics anymore. They're just pictures. They're not even pictures of things. Okay, out of the aside. But just as Susie couldn't keep Jack's avatar under her control forever, he can't do the same for her. Same to her. Throughout how the customer explained it, her trademark style leaks back in when out of the Red King's watchful eye. This wacky non-sequitur humor is edging dangerously close to the free associated pretentious hogwash perpetrated by the artist. May his bones be shot out of a cannon. In fact, have his bones shot out of a cannon. How did this hostility between you two start anyway? I can't remember. Moreover, with her contributions excised, the strip has to reckon with the fact that its plot has had massive chunks ripped out of it, and this attempt to deny that she was ever present collapses, leading to the entire universe falls apart. Rather than just having the blue artist run House of Stairs strips by before, Susie instead tampers with the strip as much as she possibly can, trying to prove that she can't be ignored. Despite how it may seem at first, the conclusion of the strip represents a step towards compromise. Not only is the Red King forced to make a narrative choice he doesn't desire, he rolls the strip back to before he erased Susie's contributions from the strip's timeline, allowing them to reappear later in the spaceship arc. When the Red King goes to reselect astronauts, the eyeball with a bow gets a very different response. This rings a bell, actually. But no. You'll see, though it's not colored in, it's in like a more sketchy style, sort of more childlike. It's the same eyeball-headed girl character from before. Where there was aggression before, there is now a perhaps slightly disconcerted familiarity. Much later in the comic, as her and Jack begin to get a better understanding of each other, and even co-front in 269, their attitude towards each other improves greatly. Jack calling her his best friend in materials outside the comic. It may be confusing to singlet readers how these two can go from trying to kill each other to being so close, but this is fairly common for systems, and the road to understanding rarely starts off peacefully. Okay, this is Poorly Planned Comics essay, Increasingly Unsubtle Allegory. Poorly Planned Comics focuses on an essential metaphor that it makes more and more blunt as it progresses. Initially, it takes the form of the already discussed narrator-king versus artist conflict. This wacky non sequitur humor is getting dangerously close to the free associated pretentious hogwash perpetuated by the artist. May his bones be shot out of a cannon, in fact, have his bones shot out of a cannon. How did this hostility between you two start anyway? I can't remember. In this version, there are two diegetic cartoonist analogs. Where each comes from is unclear. The narrator simply declares himself king, while the artist only shows up after already having authored the Roomies on Acid substrip diegetically. Instead of trying to figure out where each other came from, they fight for control of the strip until the Red King is confronted with the fact that trying to erase each other is not an approach that will ever work. Hey, it's him, I killed you, you son of a bitch! You can't have art without an artist. A world without me is not a world at all. We were doing just hunky-dory before you came along. I can't remember how that happened. You're not the solution, you're the problem. Clearly killing you isn't enough to get rid of you. For good, let's try this. The artist never exists. Wait. A wooden replica of his large head, slowly changing. I've done this before. I erased something from time, and that's what caused this. In Blue Strip Script, we see a reimagined version of this arc. The artist is introduced when he interrupts the climactic battle of the war with Nemi, because it's too hard to draw. By modernizing the armies, the conflict gets scaled up to mutually assured destruction, at which point the artist suggests the king make them indestructible. And the king, discussing this seemingly insane suggestion with Alger, goes back through the archives, pieces together that he's the narrator. He has no memory of being the narrator, and indeed the narrator seems to have a substantially different personality. But it would indeed appear that this is his identity. Having verified this, he pretends to the artist that he always knew he was the narrator, and that he's fighting this war for entertainment purposes, which is largely true in any case. He says he's bored with it now, though, and he leaves Alger in charge of the kingdom, while he and the artist go off and make random comics, and he probes the artist's motives and abilities. In the next version, the comic strip gets a new duo of narrator figures who speak in the same voice. They look like two identical girls, and the strip is established to exist within their mind, as the strip is the ship, which is the Victorias themselves. How real are these characters? What do you mean? Like, if I'm walking around, is it possible I could run into them? Not yet. Characters bleed through levels of fiction due to use. My categorization is fuzzy, and updates are biased towards reifying their subjects. Why does your categorization matter? You're just a spaceship. The ship is the comic. What do you mean the ship is the comic? The script is Poorly Planned Comics land. That may have been what you intended, but what you said was Poorly Planned Comics became a spaceship. Man with daily boppers and boat. Status, dead. Hold on, for Christ's sakes. How can the ship... How can the ship be the comic? What does that even mean? Okay, I need to stop laughing. Too much of a fucking emotional roller coaster, okay. Reading this always is. This comic. Cut this part out. You hardly have license to complain about it. You're the one who did it. You should be more careful. You should shut up. Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy. Status. Dead. Okay, I need him to calm down after reading that. I should cut that reading from the whole video because I'm not going to be able to do it in a straight face. That part of the comic is too funny. Note that the Victorias always have abstract imagery behind them, usually chaotic and reminiscent of the blue artist style when they begin eschewing representation entirely, or the collages in Tufa. Like, I can't read an acronym aloud, I have to spell it out. Great. The entire universe falls apart. This section of the comic also includes characters from the Red King's dream bleeding out into the main strip, and the King begrudgingly treating them as real. Or slur warning below. Everyone can vote. Even imaginary people. No, not imaginary people. That's discrimination. Fine, let's give imaginary people the vote. They can't be any more redacted than the non-imaginary people. Yay! In the next version of this allegory, the narrator encounters an alternate version of himself. Seeing his own existence as mutually exclusive with theirs, they fight over who is real. Their argument is futile, as no amount of game theory nonsense can the blue guy can settle the score, and they are generally depicted as foolish for not accepting each other as real. Look, this wasn't really supposed to be a two-way thing. Yeah, likewise awkward, I suppose. You know you're hypothetical? Actually, you're the hypothetical one. Not really, but it doesn't matter what you think, so what's up around here? In the next version, Susie turns the M-strip parody of her headmate into a new headmate in order to try to force the reader to see that the work has multiple authors. Note, find a better way to cite comic panels and just don't read that. Oh my god. Not that I would doubt your intuition, but what makes you think it's not just a one-time glitch? My head is full of insights. I normally think about 5 times faster than I talk. Right now I'm thinking 50 times faster. And it's all self-aware stuff. Judy, I'm going to need a lot of room to talk in the next panel. This thing is a mirror. Doesn't it mean that the cartoonist is being less careless? No. It means that the cartoonist doesn't know what happens next. Isn't that always the case? No, when I recycle existing material into my strip, like Adventure Kids, I always know exactly what happens next, and I simply write the Red King's dialogue to make it look like his interference is the catalyst of the pre-existing oddities in the metafictional material. Sometimes he has free will, sometimes it's an illusion. Hey, slow down. What's the hurry here? I almost said something that would have been a good place to end the strip. I'll say it a different way. The urgency here comes from the fact that, while having free will may sound like a good thing, one of the things it indicates is that the character is not serving a known purpose within the narrative. The kinds of thoughts I'm having now make it abundantly clear in retrospect that up until this very strip my thinking has been rigged, in the very same way I sometimes rig the thinking of the Red King. This means that the entirety of the strip within a strip was pre-existing material, and we've now either reached the end of it, or worse, the cartoonist has lost interest in recycling what's left. I have a lot of ideas for what happens next in my version of the comic, which makes me think there may be multiple abortive pre-existing endings. The comic that crashed your browser was about the Blue King and Red King simulations of each other, leading to an ambiguity as which one was real, and I plan to at some point involve our strip via a sort of live theater setup. Being turned into a girl throws a wrench into things, because narration in one strip affecting the strip it's inside makes no sense in the ontology I was planning to use. I know you like stop talking now of our strip ambiguous, but I think... Please have a seat. Would you like some water? No? Okay, your file thing says that you think you're the cartoonist. Is that right? Oh, wait, it says you actually are the cartoonist. Huh. Quote, the rooms on Susie's side have always been much larger, but Maggie must have knocked some walls out, as this one is enormous. Quote, no, he realizes it. He just leaves it up to us to stop him, because he's a fucking lunatic. Quote, speaking of which, who even am I? I don't think I'm supposed to be in this story. I'll catch you later, assuming Maggie doesn't eat you or something. Excerpts from A Terrifying Journey into the Heart of the Human Soul from the Sneaky Basement Entries. which appears to be a partially fictionalized record of interactions in a headspace or dreamscape. Quote, I think that may be a bridge too far for me, honestly. Not that it's unreasonable, but I have a really hard time not insulting people. I guess that's part of why Maggie is slowly consuming my soul. She's a superior construct in that regard. Sarthariels may be the most insulting entity I've ever interacted with, and I like her the best, but I'm gradually coming to accept that I'm just not the right Muppet for this role. I don't think it's going to be that easy. Reprocessed is the word that comes to mind. Jack, discussing Maggie in one of the redacted segments of the cartoonist, goes completely disorientingly insane. Note, find a better way to cite this too. In the last sections of the comic, Susie gives up on using metaphors or proxies to talk about herself and simply reveals herself to the audience, talks about her life, and begs not to be ignored. Then it's over. Alright, well, this is back to unscripted mode because it's the end of the video. I don't really have a coherent way to tie up this essay, because every time I've tried to write one, it just sort of falls apart. Like what I said earlier about, I just don't have it in me to curate this in a way that I think will be coherent. I sort of just want to end this video by reading an excerpt from the surviving pieces of Mind Surgery. Amy. All people live in a fantasy in which they are the main character. Iris. Actually, that's been on the fritz for me lately. There are 4 of us, but I couldn't remember who the 4th one was. It stumped me for about 45 seconds. Eventually I realized it was me. It's not that unusual mental glitch, but this is easily the longest I've had it for, and when the realization came, it had a totally different character to it. Normally it's just, oh, it's me, duh. This time it was like, oh, that guy. Hey, he's great. Well, I do not know if this has been a better Poorly Planned Comics YouTube video. It has been a different one at least, so I can say I had done that. I can read more of these notes, but I'm going to turn this off now.